So start.
Well, good morning, friends. Today I am going to deal with the element of social satire in Oscar Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Honest. In order to point out the elements of satire in any play or any work of art, literature, for example, we have to understand and read the text in and against the context, the background. So, what becomes very important for us is to consider the place and the time. The place obviously is England. The places mentioned are London on the one hand and Hertfordshire, the countryside, on the other. The time, similarly, is the 1890s. The intellectually, philosophically, and socially tension-filled decade at the end of the century, 19th century. So, apparently, the story is a fantasy. It is in keeping with Oscar Wilde's aestheticism. Based on art for art's sake, and also to an extreme situation or extent, it is also life for art's sake. Here, life actually follows art. Apparently, the question of identity, the quest for identity, and the revelation of identity are in some ways related to the making serious of the trivial. If you remember the subtitle, it is a trivial comedy for serious people. So the triviality of the play, we want to rescue the play from this triviality, we have to consider it in the light of a social satire. Now, first of all, we have to understand what are the things that this play satirizes. Or in another word, Wilde satirizes. Now there is the institution of marriage. There is a emotional attachment of love. There is a very real concern with identity. And there is also a mindfulness about financial solvency. All these things are taken up by Wilde in his own inimitable way. But in the process, very famous holy cows are touched, very important social and moral institutions and conceptions are problematized, questioned, criticized, almost taken apart. Let us discuss them one by one. Because even though all these things are interrelated, for the sake of our convenience, At least for discussion, we have to treat them one by one. Yet at the same time, we have to point out the agents, the important characters from the place cast in order to understand the real ramifications of this criticism and also the object criticized. Well, the first and foremost means of this criticism is Wilde's faultless dialogue. His chiseled and squint epigrams that takes up the tired words of conventional epigrams but give them very telling jolts from time to time in order to point out how the inversion of those epigrams are as pointed and as satirically barbed as the platitudes they invert. This is how Lady Harbury's age and appearance may be indicated by Lady Bracknell. I have never seen a woman looking 20 years younger. And the context is her recent widowhood. So, after being, apparently, obviously, after being liberated from the onerous and odious institution of marriage, Harbury has shed her age. Similarly, by pointing out how divorces are made in heaven, while in his apparently simplistic and innocent way is making a very telling dig, taking a telling dig at the institution of religion and preordination as a concept. Now, apparently, since marriages are made in heaven, it is heaven or the divinity that preordains what will happen. So if that be so, then obviously divorces are also made in heaven. This in some ways problematizes the characteristic Christian conception that once man and wife are united, may no man tear them asunder. So divorce, which is a legal way of separating the married, becomes as much a preordained fact as was the marriage. Okay. Along with this dialogue on this level, obviously there is another level. That is the level of institution, whereby institutions are criticized and satirized. For example, the romantic nature of love is itself scoffed at. And the plot shows how our characteristic Victorian notions about love and lovers and beloveds are given a severe jolt by Wilde. First thing is the vacuity, the meaninglessness of romantic love is pointed out. When people like Cicely can construct out of imagination not only a person but also a relationship. And the romantic infatuation that both these girls feel for the name of Earnest is pointed out as a sham when their at least conceived Earnests, in the case of Gwendolen, Jack, and in the case of Cicely, LG, turn out to be men who are not earnest in reality. At least for the better portion of the play. And that Jack ultimately turns out to be earnest after all has got nothing to do with the romantic feeling that the name Earnest elicits from Gwendolen. Okay. You know, even the lovers and the beloved are also shown by Wilde in unexpected lights. Apparently, both the gentlemen, Jack and LG, are villainous characters because they lead double lives. It seems to generate expectations or suspicions in the minds of readers of sexual deceit and corruption. Because leading the double life in a Victorian context often meant sexual license and corruption. But in this play, there is curiously an absence of evil. So the escapade of LG in the second act, whereby he descends on the country house residence of Jack and Cicely, has all the makings of a sexual encounter or an adventure. But ultimately what happens? Just as Jack was made by a stern, worldly wise and masterful woman, Gwendolen, who could make him propose and take the entire matter of their love affair out of his hands and direct everything by becoming more active in direct contravention of our social expectation of a passive Victorian woman. Similarly, even though LG had apparently come to Jack's place in the country for a flirtation with a country innocent girl, he is met by again another masterful woman who assigns to him the role of a fiancé. Thereby, the women folk who are supposed to be passive and whose protectors their lovers should be, if we want to look at the social convention of the Victorian time. Both Jack and LG willed before the determined onslaught of their respective female counterparts, Gwendolen and Cecily, who not only dictate terms in the relationship, but also force them to conform to that means the girls' expectations, by trying to christen themselves as Earnest. But along with love, there is also the question of marriage as a necessary and in some ways natural offshoot of or culmination of the love relationship. Here, the entire game is changed. The norms are also subverted. Before we go into that, we must not forget to talk about two other lovers, the pair of Prism and Chasuble. Here also, Chasuble is a passive entity, whereas Prism is more bubbly and more aggressive pursuer of the two. In the case of marriage, in most cases, in the Victorian times, marriages were mercenary. And here, the presence of Lady Bracknell is a very significant factor to be reckoned with. You remember, Lord Bracknell is a symbolic character who never appears, about whom Gwendolen can very easily say, Papa is, I am glad to say, entirely unknown outside of the family circle. And that is what it should be. According to Gwendolen, a man, if he neglects his domestic duties, becomes terribly effeminate. Because the proper sphere of a man is the home, according to Gwendolen. Now, apparently, this is just a whimsical inversion of the social expectations of Wilde, the verbal iconoclast. But we must also remember that this takes a dig at the concept and phenomenon of the new woman at the end of the 19th century. The aggressive, assertive, educated new woman who would stop at nothing, assert her identity, and try to boss the household was in itself as much an ideational reality as a patriarchal nightmare. If we look at the Punch, the famous magazine Um, then all the issues of the 1894-95 period, if we look at those issues, never stops short of criticizing the new woman. Because this was not acceptable to the Victorian patriarchy. See, in the case of marriage, Lady Bracknell plays the part of a bargainer. She tries to get the best deal, not only for her daughter in the matter of Jack, but also in the case of her nephew LG, as against Cecily. But Wilde here plays a very subtle game by giving Lady Bracknell much more than what she expected. Wilde actually seems to render her concerns not only as greedy and full of machinations, but also as ludicrous, laughable. Now, so far as the question of identity is concerned, the entire concept of consanguineal relationship, whereby the question of blood, parentage, is given a very important place in social and sociological considerations, is given a shake by this play. Jack apparently is a foundling. In his case, the uncertainties about his parentage almost comes to ruin his love and marital expectations. But ultimately, it so happens that the practical-minded Wilde does not make Gwendolen marry the foundling. Society, in some ways, has the last laugh because Jack is no longer a foundling. He is really a member of the aristocracy. His real name is really Earnest. And his parentage is not only known but also eminently respectable. So ultimately what happens? Jack and LG prove to be brothers. In the case of Jack, his real name turns out to be Earnest. Gwendolen marries her first cousin. Cecily is also married off to an aristocratic member of the society. So everything happens as it should be. And there also is Wilde's masterful satire, whereby the ability of society and social conventions not only to coerce but also to co-opt is shown at its fullest. I hope this discussion will help you in understanding the elements of social satire in Oscar Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Honest. Thanks for listening. Bye. Well, one part that I have not talked about, insofar as the social satire presented by Oscar Wilde in The Importance of Being Earnest is concerned, is related to the clergy, the religious setup. You know, while talking about other things like romantic love, marriage, the class, and also the question of identity, Wilde has also taken a slingshot at religion and the religious setup. Dr. Chasuble, if you read the novel, read the play or carefully, you will see that Dr. Chasuble is not a very dignified figure who would claim our admiration. Dr. Chasuble is shown here interested more in secular things, more in gaining the love of mysticism and less in religious matters. You will see that from the very beginning, she always tries to ensure the love of mysticism. And that's why she always stays close to mysticism in Hertfordshire. He is a country curate for whom his sermon of manna does duty for everything, from baptism to funeral. Now, this shows the utter vacuity of the canon. Similarly, he does not feel any hesitation in allowing very irregular religious rites like baptism for all ages. When LG and Jack both want to rechristen themselves as Earnest, without any hesitation, Dr. Chasuble is ready to do their bidding. So we will see that Dr. Chasuble is a butt end of ridicule for Wilde, and through him, Wilde takes a dig at the religious setup of his day. I hope this discussion will satisfy and adequately answer your query regarding the religious aspect of Wilde's social satire in The Importance of Being Earnest. Thank you.